Welcome, Hoosier fans, to a rather relieving edition of the Assembly Call this week. As you all should know, Jared and the guys are actually on their way out of Assembly Hall right now. So Josh and I are going to take over for them this week, and the Hoosiers are fresh off a very, very slim victory over the Gophers. And don't you worry, we have a lot to say about this one. But first, Josh, how you feeling after that one? That was something else.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't think I was gonna have to sweat through that one, but it was right up to the last minute of the game until we finally broke through there. And Thomas Bryant, I mean, just that's all you really have to say about this one. He grew up today. That was definitely, I mean, it was a career high 23 points for him, but we'll definitely get into that. But I did not think we'd be sweating this one out today.
Yeah, I don't think anyone did, no matter if you were, for the Hoosiers or the Gophers. That was completely unexpected. And in the first half, I noted when the score was 30-19 that Indiana's not even really making an effort right now, and they hold a double-digit lead in a conference game. Like that's saying something. That means something pretty significant. And they continued to just kind of play with that same intensity. They didn't really ever, pick it up. They never played with the same intensity they did when they played Northwestern or even Wisconsin, a game that they lost. They couldn't quite match that intensity. So that was something that stuck out that I would love to get to at some point. But I want to start with our banner moment, and I'm pretty sure that this guy will be a common theme for the next 60 or so minutes, Thomas Bryant. I mean, he's usually this guy that, picks up a couple points, gets a couple rebounds. He's kind of hot and cold, and obviously he's a huge focal point of the offense. But the thing that he's known for around here is his energy and his intensity. And I'm sure that you and I have noticed pretty much every time he does something, he's pounding his chest or slapping the floor or doing something. But I noticed something different from him at the very beginning, and he didn't change that. And in the very beginning, he got an and one, I think, and just kind of was, walking around the crowd and just kind of going like this, telling everyone to chill out. He wasn't doing his chest banging or anything like that. He was kind of like, let's relax. It's all good, kind of stuff like that. And it was refreshing to me to see that. I thought that stuck out more than almost anything else in the entire first half, the entire game rather, other than the obvious breakdown that was the final 20 minutes. But to me, and this may not be a conventional banner moment, but my banner moment today was Thomas Bryant kind of reaching a level of maturity where, he was kind of this kid earlier in the year that would get, go crazy over an open layup against IPFW. And here we are in Big Ten play, and he gets an and one, and he's kind of honing himself. He's like, all right, relax. It's all good. We're good. Everyone relax. It's okay. And I like that a lot. I thought it was refreshing because when you have a spark plug of a freshman who has that much energy balled up in him in a conference game, that could escalate very, very quickly. And it was very refreshing to see him kind of relax and have the career high game that he did. He couldn't miss a shot. He was manhandling whoever the Gophers threw on him, and he was crashing the boards rather well. His defense was a struggle. We'll get to that in a little, but he was relaxed. He calmed down, and it was very refreshing to see because it was different and it worked. So that's my banner moment for the game, is Thomas Bryant relaxing and having the best game of his life. And I thought it was lovely. And you are filling in for Will in terms of the stat of the game. What do you have for me? I'm guessing it has something to do with Thomas.
I mean, Thomas Bryant's 23 points, obviously a big point in this game. But my stat of the game is the three-point shooting for this team. They shot just 11% from three-point range. And this has been a team all year that, especially at home, in the last two home games they averaged about 50% from three-point range. This game, just 2 of 18 from behind the arc. And nobody thought this game was going to be a struggle. We thought Indiana was going to run away with this like they did against Northwestern, Ohio State, and Illinois. This game was a struggle, and they really had to grind it out, and a big part of that was Thomas Bryant inside with his 23 points, as you were just mentioning. But why Indiana couldn't extend their lead in this game and keep their lead, it was because what they rely on so much, their three-point ball, they could not hit, and that was a big issue in this game, and that's why they couldn't extend their lead like they maybe have wanted to.
Yeah, that was huge, and it just seemed like nothing would fall. And then in desperation mode at about the 2-3 minute mark, Robert Johnson, I think, hurled 2 threes that were both open and missed them both. And I'm like, how? Like, this is a team, I think Yogi Ferrell had one too. Like, this is a team that's supposed to shoot the lights out. And here they are. They've made 2 threes. They're like, I think they were 2 of 15 at that point. And I'm like, what is happening right now? They can't hit the side of a barn. I mean, no pun intended, considering it was Minnesota. But I mean, what was happening with them? It just they couldn't do anything. I think the Northwestern bug bit them because they couldn't hit a shot last Saturday. This Saturday, Indiana can't hit a shot. Now, I don't know. That's obviously fixable. These are incredibly capable Division I basketball players. You know, cold shooting nights happen. But this was horrible. And, I mean, that stat is astounding. You said 2 of 18. Both teams actually were 2 of 18 shooting from beyond the arc, 11%. That is – there's no really – it's putrid. It's pitiful. There's no word really in the English language to describe how terrible that is for an Indiana team. And – you know, we'll get to that in a little bit when we really, really dive in and break this game down. But first, we just have to remind everyone that you should subscribe here. You know, you want to get on the email list, subscribe. We provide analysis at 6:30 every morning after each IU game, win or loss, no matter the end time, no matter the start time. You will get it in your email inbox at 6:30 Central Time, and it's yours to read. Just go to assemblycall.com/subscribe. Or you can text Indiana to 44144. That's INDIANA to 44144. You'll get a text response, and you just reply with your email address, and you will be on that list. 6:30 tomorrow morning, you'll get that email. Joining will make you one of over 1,500 people who receive our emails every week with post-game analysis every morning. And this is stuff you cannot find anywhere else. We don't tweet it. We don't put it on the blog. We don't put it anywhere. It's just on that email list, and it's for those people who subscribe. Again, assemblycall.com/subscribe or text Indiana to 44144. It's completely free. It always has been, and it always will be. Get on that email list, and you will get expert analysis every morning that you can't get anywhere else on the site. Again, this is the Assembly Call postgame show. Hoosiers against Minnesota. They got the 6-point win. This is the intern edition. I'm Michael Dugan here with Josh Easton. We're breaking down that win today. It was something else. Thanks for joining us. Obviously, Jared and the guys walking out from Assembly Hall. They're over at Yogi's now. Go and meet them, shake their hand, talk some hoops. And Josh and I are here on a beautiful Bloomington Saturday afternoon. It really feels like March almost, but not after that game. So, Josh, I ask you, with that transition, what do the Hoosiers need to do looking at this game to rebound and get back to March form that they have been in for almost the entire season up until today?
You know, I mean, honestly, I'd be totally okay if they scrapped this game tape, because this was a team that they should have won by at least 20 points. I mean, they struggled with them on the road. I mean, and that's on the road, which is fine. But this is a game I think you just got to forget about, move on to Michigan, where you got bigger and better things to accomplish. You're top of the Big Ten right now, and you just played a Minnesota team that probably won't win a game until they play Rutgers one of 2 times. Maybe they'll pull off an upset somewhere else. But this was a game where they really should have exerted their dominance early on when they had a double-digit lead, and leading by 12 at halftime. They easily could have extended that. They had a lot of missed opportunities. They didn't hit their shot particularly well. And Yogi Ferrell, I mean, he really struggled in this game. He only had, or I mean, actually, I guess he did have 13 points, but he was only 2 of 9 from the field, 8 of 8 from the charity stripe, and that's where he got most of his points. But Yogi Ferrell's got to get back on track, hit his shot. I think that's what Indiana needs to do moving forward to Michigan and Penn State, both on the road coming up. So they played very well at home in the month of January. Now with it moving to February, they need to start playing team basketball again. This game was nice because they did integrate the bench a little bit with OG Anunoby and Max Bielfeldt coming in. But Yogi Ferrell has got to get back to where he was just even a couple days ago in Wisconsin. This game, just forget about it. You're not going to play a team as bad as Minnesota the rest of the season. So now you really got to turn it on and start playing your best basketball starting Tuesday at Michigan on the road.
I agree with you, but I also disagree with you. I don't think this is a game that they should forget about, because Minnesota is probably the worst team in the conference right there with Rutgers. And the gap between, Minnesota and Rutgers, and then even to, Michigan, or even a step below them like Northwestern, maybe Illinois, Nebraska, is large. Now, take into consideration the gap between Minnesota and now Indiana. That's monumental, the difference in quality of play there. So Indiana now knows they're vulnerable at home, and they have not really played a close game at home all season long. And they just did, and they were losing with just a couple ticks to go in the second half against Minnesota, who is now 10 games below 10 games below 500 and haven't won a game in the conference. So Indiana now knows that they are very vulnerable, and Yogi Ferrell knows that he's human. You know, you said 2 of 9 shooting. He got 8 of his 13 points from the line. He only had 3 assists and 2 turnovers, along with 2 fouls. Did not have a steal, only had 2 rebounds. He played horrible. I mean, I can't sugarcoat that, and there's no way to sugarcoat that. He was terrible. Troy Williams was not great. He had 6 rebounds, 1 assist. He only had 3 fouls. He was 4 of 10 shooting, which is okay, 5 of 7 from the line, but he didn't really turn any heads, you know? This is a matchup nightmare. Troy Williams is a matchup nightmare for Minnesota. So is Yogi Ferrell. These guys should be both in the 20s and have more than 3 assists and 6 boards and shoot better than 22% like Yogi Ferrell did. I mean, this is concerning for me. I think that going forward, Indiana's got to not think about this the whole time because only bad things can happen, but keep in the back of their mind that no matter who they play or where they are for the remainder of the season, whether it be at home against Nebraska or on the road against Michigan State or Purdue, they are vulnerable because they almost lost this game. And it almost seemed like they didn't know they were in a close one until Thomas Bryant said, "Oh my God, we're losing. What do I do? I'll take over the game." And that's what happened. And it's a concern for me because they've kind of had a killer's mentality throughout the whole season. They probably walked into this thinking, "Oh, we're 17-4. It's Minnesota. We're at home on a Saturday afternoon. We're gonna blow away these guys. Move on to Michigan. We'll beat them. Blah blah blah." No. This is Big Ten basketball. You and I have been saying this on our weekly Big Ten shows more than 10 times a show. Anything can happen in the Big Ten, and almost anything did happen here today. This is a sign of concern for Indiana going forward. Yogi Ferrell and Troy Williams need to know that they can't do it all. And in the real world and in Big Ten basketball, everything is not always going to be okay. You are going to lose games. You are going to lose games you shouldn't, and this was almost one of those games. I think that the Hoosiers have to have this in the back of their mind, maybe even in the front of their mind the next time they enter the weight room or the practice court or the film study, because this was terrible. No one other than Thomas Bryant and OG Anunoby, who are 2 of 4 guys I want to talk about next, looked good. No one besides them. Robert Johnson, terrible. He was 1 of 6 from the field. He had 1 of 6 threes. He took his only shots from 3. He was good crashing the boards. But then in another aspect of his game, he was terrible. Yogi Ferrell was not good anywhere. Troy Williams was not good anywhere. It's concerning to me. And I understand where you're coming from, that they need to wipe this, because when you think back to like, oh my God, we were terrible. What if we start doing this again? Bad things happen. You're completely correct there. I can't argue that. But at the same time, how are they going to improve upon this performance and change the things that they need to change? And there were plenty of those things if they can't think about this. So I think this needs to stay in the back of their mind for at least the next game or two. Obviously focus on Michigan and then Nebraska and Iowa and whoever they have after those. But the next time out, Monday, maybe even tomorrow, when they're watching film, this was terrible. Whatever they did today, don't ever do it again unless your name is Thomas Bryant. I mean, they just looked horrible in almost every aspect of the game. And, the first 20 minutes, the first half, it didn't really look like they gave too much of an effort. Do you agree with me there?
Yeah, I don't know what if there was a hangover from Wisconsin the other day or what the issue was there. Maybe they were looking ahead to Michigan. But what Tom Crean talks about, he said it in his post-game press conference multiple times, is that they respect each opponent. So I wonder if maybe this one they maybe took a little bit off of Minnesota and we're like, okay, this is Minnesota. Either coming into our place or where we won by an average of 30 points in the last few games here at home. And maybe we can just kind of look ahead to Michigan and fix some things from Wisconsin. But no, I don't think they necessarily gave Minnesota the respect they may have deserved, because they were coming in with basically nothing to lose in this game. I mean, they're 0-9, now 0-9 in the Big Ten. Haven't won a game, or they've won 1 game since November 30th, which is just putrid. And so I wonder if that respect level was there for this team, because Nate Mason, he came out and played, and Dorsey off the bench, who scored 21 on 10 of 19 shooting.
Yeah, my lord.
That's a big number coming off the bench. And I don't know, maybe Indiana didn't respect Minnesota like they should have, but I hope they do respect Michigan, because on Tuesday, that's going to be a big-time battle. And if players like Yogi Ferrell and Troy Williams, and I mean, I guess Thomas Bryant was really the only one who really exceeded expectations in this one today with his career-high 23. But if people don't come ready to play on Tuesday, that's going to be a long game, because it's on the road against a tough Michigan team. So, I mean, there are some things, I guess, in this game that you can look at and say, okay, we can definitely improve upon this and this, or whatever it may be. But I don't know if that respect level was there for Minnesota today.
Yeah, and I agree with you there. And most people are going to look back and say that the second half is where it all fell apart. I'm going to disagree. And Josh, you may disagree with that, but I'm going to read you some numbers first, just to sell what I have on the table here, just so people can buy or sell what I'm saying. So Minnesota started out on a 7-0 run. They started the game on a 7-0 run, and Indiana started 1 of 8. And I think Thomas Bryant broke that with an and one. They had too many fouls in the first couple minutes of the game. Obviously, cold shooting. There was no energy. I noted this from the start, and that never changed. That's in my notes for every block of the media timeouts. No energy, no energy. Bryant wasn't very good on defense, and he needed to bring the energy, and he did. So at the first media timeout, Minnesota was up 9-4. At the second media timeout, Minnesota was up 14-12. So Indiana got their stuff together, but they still weren't that good. Why? But why'd they get their stuff together, you ask? Thomas Bryant came out of the game. Max Bielfeldt scored 4 straight points. He took Max Bielfeldt out when he started to get hot, and I was kind of scratching my head there. Thomas Bryant came in, and that's when he started to get hot. He couldn't really box out on defense. He was struggling on the boards, but he was putting up points for Indiana, enough so that they finally took the lead at the third media timeout, the under 8 timeout. They took the lead, finally. OG, I want to talk about OG just in 1 minute after I finish this, but he was showing some great signs of breaking loose. He was playing aggressive. He was the only guy, it seemed, all day who was playing with consistent energy. He was making plays happen. He had a couple blocks. I don't know what the total is on that. I'll check when I'm done rambling here. But he played with great energy. He hit the boards. He created his shots. He's got great court vision, too. I think that's a very underrated aspect of his game. When he has the ball in the corner, he's dribbling with his left hand, and he's looking. He sees everything. It's great to see. And, you know, it's refreshing, because this guy is very athletic, and he's a tough kid, and he can get down low and create his own shot, but he's also got that point guard's mentality if I can see what's going on the court. So obviously, you know, we'll get to that in a second, but that's a great asset to have with a guy like OG. But that's also when Thomas Bryant started to take over. So it was kind of the freshman takeover for the final 8 minutes. And then at the under 4 media timeout, it was 34-21 Hoosiers, up by 13, and then up by 12, 39-27 at halftime. OG had a block towards the end there. And it was like, okay, all is well. We're up double digits. Yogi's cold. Troy's cold. They combined for 7 points at halftime. You're like, you know what? They'll get it together. Indiana's only made 2. Only at that point, had only made 2 field goals outside of the paint. Minnesota had 3. 1 3-pointer for each team. That's bad right there. That's not Indiana basketball. So they were not playing their game in the first half, and they didn't have any energy. Do those two coincide? Do they go together? Who knows? There's no way of really knowing, but you could certainly argue that that's the case. So from the get-go, to me, Indiana did not look like themselves. I mean, do you chalk that up? Josh, I'm asking you now. Do you chalk that up to bad preparation? Did Crean not get his guys fired up? What do you think? Because Crean didn't really look like he gave too much of anything, pretty much all game long. He was never really jumping all over the guys. He wasn't trying to fire them up. He was just kind of calm, be like, everything's okay, just fix this, whatever. No, you cannot do that against Minnesota when it's a single-digit game. That can't happen. It blows my mind. So Josh, does Crean need to pick this up a little bit, or is it completely on the guys to come with the energy? Because to me, Tom Crean didn't look like he cared at all about this game at any point.
I'm pretty critical of Tom Crean. I mean, I haven't really necessarily said it on here, but I'm not putting this one on Tom Crean. I'm putting this on the senior leadership on this team. I mean, Tom Crean has said, I've got to believe him. He said, we respect each opponent like the next. And I mean, I would assume that he would have his players fired up for a home game afternoon, Saturday, a Saturday afternoon home game, Assembly Hall, got the crowd behind you coming off a loss. I mean, I don't know what else you need to fire yourself up if especially coming off that loss. If you wouldn't have lost, maybe I would understand it as you're just kind of a little cocky because you're still undefeated in the Big Ten and riding high in first place. But no, they did lose that game, and I think it kind of translated over to the play on the court with especially Yogi Ferrell, because he just didn't seem to have it in the first half at all. He didn't score until, I believe, like the 6-minute mark of the first half. He only had 5 points from the field. So I'm going to put this on the players a little bit. Fire yourselves up, because the coach can only tell you so much in a game. And I don't know. I just feel like Yogi Ferrell and the players didn't necessarily get themselves fired up enough for this game and respect Minnesota. I'm not putting this one on Crean. I think this one goes directly on the players, and they better pick that up for the next game at Michigan.
Yeah, first off, you're correct. This is not on Crean. We can't sit here and say, oh, the coach lost it because the guys didn't get fired up. You're absolutely correct. It's on the seniors, Yogi and everyone else, mostly Yogi because he's clearly the leader of this team. But it's not on Crean. You can't sit here and blame Crean for that. That's on Yogi. And you were correct. At the 6:23 mark is when Yogi had his first points of the game and his only points of the first half. And you know how he got them?
Sorry, I didn't get that.
At 6:23, you were correct at about the 6-minute mark. It was the 6:23 mark of the first half. Yogi scored his first points. You know how he got them?
Yeah, free throw line.
Free throw. He hit 2 free throws because he got fouled on a drive. Those were his only points of the first half. Yogi Ferrell did not make a field goal in the first 20 minutes. Why? That should never, ever happen, especially against a team like Minnesota. I mean, we could go on and on about how Yogi and Troy struggled and, praise Thomas Bryant, which, it makes sense. But at the same time, it's like, this can't happen. This just can't happen. And it's something that tactically you can't really change because the looks were there. It's not like they were setting great screens and everyone was constantly open like has been the case all season. But it also, at the same time, Minnesota didn't play lockdown defense. And, Josh, you have one more thing to say on Yogi, but to me, this can't happen again. Get to the gym 30 minutes earlier and get more shots up. It's preventable. Cold shooting nights are going to happen, but it's preventable going forward by getting to the gym 30 minutes earlier and just hitting your shot. Because once you find your stroke, if you're capable like Yogi is, you'll get hot at some point. But he didn't find it today, and that's bad. That can't happen again. And luckily, Thomas Bryant had a different mentality going in. But Josh, what's that last thing you had to say on Yogi?
Well, yeah, I didn't see that same aggressiveness from Yogi Ferrell early in the first half when he was struggling to get going from the field. I mean, you can still drive to the basket, get fouled, and get to the line, and then you can just manufacture offense that way. But I didn't really see that from Yogi. I saw him a little tentative out there. He was passing it to his teammates, being in more of a distributive role, which is fine. But at the same time, you're coming off a 30-point game, and you're going to follow it up with 5 points from the field. I mean, I don't necessarily like that from Yogi Ferrell. So what I wish I would have seen from Yogi is driving him. You will get fouled because you're so elusive, and those big guys are not going to be able to keep up with you down on the block just because he's so quick. So if you can drive in there, draw some fouls, get to the line, get offense that way, that'll open up so many more lanes for everybody else on your team, and it really just starts with Yogi Ferrell right there.
Exactly. And we can continue to bash Yogi Ferrell and tell him how he can improve because, as far as everyone else is concerned, we can coach Yogi Ferrell to be a perfect player. But we're going to steer away from trying to do that, and we're going to focus on the positive things. And today, those were the 2 freshmen, Thomas Bryant, OG Anunoby. If you had to pick one, who were you most impressed with? Obviously, I think I know your answer here, but we can take this somewhere and really compare the 2 and dive into it. So I'm assuming you're picking Thomas Bryant, who was more impressive today.
Yes, I will pick Thomas Bryant, but that doesn't discredit what I thought of OG Anunoby because I think he might have played one of his best games of the season. It may not have shown in the point totals. He just had 8, but he was so active. He had a career-high 3 blocks. He was active. He was running end-to-end. He had the most energy, I think, of anybody on the team, maybe besides Bryant. But he was really impressive to see today, and Tom Crean gave him action. I mean, he was in the game with the game on the line in the last 3 minutes. And I think that's really telling of where he has come since the beginning of the year when he really didn't play too much. And now he's in this role where he's on the floor in crunch time. And I think that's really telling. But also Thomas Bryant, I mean, how can you say or sit here and say he didn't have the best game for the Hoosiers? Because I think he definitely did with 23 points and 8 rebounds. I think that's silly to say that OG didn't have Thomas Bryant had a good game, but OG Anunoby also had a very good game. Thomas just had maybe a little bit of a better game.
Yeah, without question. And what was Thomas's his final stat line? Was it 23 and 6? Is that correct? Am I getting that right?
It was 23 and 8, I believe.
23 and 8, and he missed what? It was only 2 field goals, if I recall correctly. Let me check that right now. Thomas Bryant, 11 of 13.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't great. He 1 of 3 from the free throw line, but at the same time, he only got to the free throw line for 3 shots, which is nice because it's nice and bad, give and take. Because with a big man, you want him to get fouled. Even Nigel Hayes, who's not the size of Thomas Bryant, took
I don't want to hear.
I can't say his name. I can't say his name.
No, I know. No.
All right, so how about that guy on Wisconsin?
Yeah.
Okay, that guy up north got to the free throw line more times than Indiana did by, I think, 4 attempts. And that's because he's drawing contact and making aggressive plays in the post. You see Thomas Bryant making aggressive plays in the post, and he's not getting these foul calls. Is that, kind of frustrating? Yeah, a little bit. But you can overlook that when a guy can get to the free throw line for 3 shots, make one of them, and still have over 20 points on a team that likes to focus it on its shooting and its guards. But back to OG, I said last week on our midweek show, and you completely agreed with me, that OG is starting to have these kind of moments of breaking loose. And again, I'm not yet comparing him, but the last I saw of someone do something like that, to have these kind of flashes of greatness, was in Victor Oladipo the year before the Hoosiers broke out. He didn't really play that much the first couple of years, and by the time he was gone, he played 37 minutes of the game. And now look at him. He's just tearing up for the Magic. But that's looking way forward, and this guy still is only averaging 4 points a game. But that's not too far off from what Oladipo was doing when he first started out. And now he's a Hoosier legend, and he just graduated. I mean, it's crazy, and I think that he can really break out. He's very athletic. He's real stocky. I mean, you look at him, and you're like, oh, this guy's going to be a bruiser. He doesn't look too athletic, but then he plays, and his look doesn't really match his game. He's super athletic. He's stocky. He's a big guy. He can back you down. He can block. He can grab rebounds. He can move around you. He's super long. He can really do it all. I mean, he's not quite as athletic as Oladipo was, but his game's not too far off. And I'm not that's not the best possible comparison, those two, but his game is not too far off. He's showing these flashes of greatness that you really can't really describe on a stat sheet. He's not scoring a lot. He's getting a couple of blocks. He's rebounding a little bit, but he's seeing the court. He's captaining the offense even at some points. When Yogi has the ball up top, he's setting screens and pointing to Yogi where to go and stuff like that. And I love just watching him whenever he's in the game. It's a treat for a true basketball fan to see this kid who's a freshman, who Tom Crean said after, I forget what game it was, you were there, when he said that we're going to start treating like OG, we're going to start treating OG, like any guy, not as a freshman. I can't remember what game that was. Not entirely relevant. Do you remember what game that was?
Yeah, that was against your Northwestern Wildcats.
That was against Northwestern. I can't say that. That was against the team from Evanston.
Yeah, no,
That was against the team from Evanston.
Yeah.
And he played incredibly well that game too. And again, he's not playing every minute of every game. He's coming off the bench. I think he's playing a little less than Bielefeld does. And Bielefeld's playing fantastic too. Let's get to him in a second. I want to talk about him. But again, I can't express it enough. I think OG is soon on his way to really, really, really good things in a Crimson uniform. I mean, do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Where am I wrong here?
No, I think you're spot on with OG Anunoby. I mean, he has a wingspan of 7'2". I mean, that is just incredible. That's an incredible human being right there, and he is capable of doing so many things. I mean, he can step outside, shoot the three. I mean, you were talking about all the things he can do. He can back somebody down. He runs end to end. He plays defense, which is especially important for this team. Although I would have liked to see him against number 10 for Wisconsin the other day, but that's a different story. No, but I mean, he can do so much on a basketball court that can help a team in so many different ways. I mean, he's not the main scoring option for this team, which I think is a good thing. It takes a little bit of pressure off of him, where he can just go out, play his game, come off the bench, give you a good, solid, maybe 20 minutes, depending on, I don't know, his minute mark for today or what it's been. But he can do so many different things on a basketball court that he brings to this team that it didn't really have without him. I mean, you're missing a lockdown defender. I mean, he was put on Mason in this game, and Mason was totally shut down. I think it was towards the end of the first half where he was on him, and Mason just had to force up a shot, and OG was in his face the entire time. And it's just impressive what we've seen from this freshman that we weren't necessarily expecting to see this quick from OG Anunoby this quick in the season.
Yeah, and on that minute note, he played 22 minutes today, which is, I believe, a season high, but don't write me down for that. I'm double-checking that right now. But he played 22 minutes today, which it is, in fact, a season high for him by a large margin. 22 minutes for him. He had 6 boards and 8 points off 2 of 4 shooting from the field and 4 of 6 from the line, along with those 3 blocks. And then he had a steal, too. So, again, he's not blowing up the stat sheet by any means. I mean, those are fine numbers. But, again, if you are just going to sit there and look at the stat sheet and say, oh, he's not that good, he doesn't make a difference for Indiana, why should he be in the game right now? You're wrong. You are very, very wrong, and I can't express that enough. I don't think you can express that enough because we're so high on this kid. And I may be a little in over my head here, but I think if this kid stays for 4 years, I mean, he could make a legacy here because, I mean, again, very forward thinking, but this kid, he's got it all. I mean, so far he's very raw still. He's still raw, but he's at the point right now where Crean and the guys can develop him throughout the season into someone that can impact the game at almost any point. I mean, it's nice to see him on the floor with Bryant, Yogi, Johnson, and Williams. That's a nice lineup to have. And when everyone's clicking, that's as dangerous as almost any 5 in the whole country. But this guy, I think, come Big Ten tournament time, if he progresses a little bit more, could be a really nice asset to have off the bench and put in when your team is struggling to get a little spark, or even just mix it up a little bit in the neck-and-neck game. He's an X factor to me. Him and Bielefeld are 2 of probably the 3 MVPs of this team, because without these guys, this team's not sitting here at 18-4. It's just not possible. And on that note, let's talk about Bielefeld, unless you had anything else to say on OG.
I got one more thing. I mean, going over to Colin Hartman for a second, I mean, he really did not have a big game today, and he's kind of been falling off a little bit of late. He hasn't been hitting his shot like he was earlier in the season. And one thing that would not disturb me one bit is to see OG Anunoby get a start here coming up and take Colin Hartman off the floor and put him on the bench, because I think he'd be great off the bench. That's where he was last season, and he excelled in that role. So maybe just one game, see how it works. If it doesn't, then whatever. I mean, it is what it is. But I would like to see OG Anunoby maybe crack the starting lineup just once and just see what he brings, especially on the defensive end of the floor.
And how about next week against Michigan? If Karis LeVert comes back, that's a hell of a matchup for him to start his starting career with. But, again, that's a game that right now is a complete toss-up and probably in favor of Michigan based off Michigan's win today, actually in Madison Square Garden, and how Indiana just played at home against Minnesota. But how about against Michigan? Why not throw him in the lineup there, just if Karis LeVert comes back? Because OG's long enough, like you said, 7'2" wingspan, to close out and prevent those, step-back fadeaway jumpers that LeVert loves so much. And he's also, big enough and capable enough to stop him from backing down in the post. I think that's a real awesome matchup, and I'd be watching that the whole time if that were the case. What do you think? First of all, let's make this a twofold question. Part 1, do you think it's a good idea? If you were Tom Crean, would you do it? Part 2, do you think it's going to happen? Why or why not? Let's talk about that.
First of all, I do think it's a good idea. I mean, that's a great matchup. We're mentioning his 7'2" wingspan. That is very effective on defense. No matter who you're guarding, you can almost match up with a big man down low if you have to, if you get switched on a screen. But secondly, I don't think he's going to do that. I mean, he's been a little tentative, Tom Crean being a little tentative, putting OG Anunoby in key situations. But today we did see him put him in crunch time. So I don't know. Maybe that's something we see. But if LeVert doesn't play, I don't think we see OG Anunoby in the starting lineup. And even if he does play, I'm not sure he's the one to crack the starting lineup. Just because he's a freshman, and even though they're saying, oh, we're not treating him like a freshman, still he's a freshman. He's raw, but he could come off the bench and provide great minutes, and he could get maybe even more than his 22 minutes that he played tonight.
Yeah, and as great as he's been, the reality is Crean's not just going to pull someone from the starting lineup, and I'd love to see it happen. I think great things could come out of it. But then again, 22 minutes today, that's the most he's played in his entire career. Granted, that's only this season because he's a freshman, but 22 minutes is the most he's played. And a starting role is a big, big deal at a program like Indiana, and you have to really bring it. And there's just a different level of play between the starters and the guys coming off the bench, especially when you're coming off fresh, 10, 12 minutes into the game, and those starters are a little winded. And starting the game against these guys when you're both fresh, he's never done that. And Michigan's a tough game to do it, especially against Karis LeVert, who's just not really fresh, but also fresh at the same time. Not healthy, but he's off of, a month now worth of rest. But I would love to see it happen. I agree with you that he's not going to do it. However, he has been kind of, not certain in terms of the starting lineup since Blackman went down. We've seen him shuffle it a couple times. We even saw him shuffle it in Maui after that loss against Wake Forest, and we saw it earlier in the year when Blackman was still healthy. So it could happen, and Bielefeld may find his way in there, pull Troy Williams off the bench, which I think he did in Maui, if I recall correctly. Correct me if I'm wrong there. But he could change it up a little bit, and that could mean OG and Troy come off the bench at the 15-minute mark or the 16-minute mark or the 17-minute mark, mind you. Maybe even like a Manu Ginobili type thing, come right off the bench. But I'm going to be very interested to see how he goes about that, he being Tom Crean, because he can do a lot of things with the starting lineup. I think it needs some shuffling. I think Colin Hartman's playing a little too much given the production that he's having. He's not really hitting his shots lately like he was earlier in the year. Troy Williams isn't playing that well, but we need him on the floor. OG's doing OG things. And, again, it's such a huge leap for him to go from the bench and being productive and starting. And like I said, don't knock him for his stats because they're not that great. You have to knock him in this case because you can't really start if you're not producing on the stat sheet, which he will at some point. I'm so certain of that. But he's not at that point yet. Like we said, he's still raw. So I don't think Tom Crean will put him in the starting lineup. But it's certainly an interesting debate to have because it's not a bad idea at all. And maybe even Bielefeld, too. Bielefeld has been sensational to me offensively. Defensively, it's a different story. But with the ball, he's finding his shot, and he's doing a great job. What do you think about Bielefeld today and even just in conference play so far this season?
Yeah, I mean, he's really changed his game from Michigan. He said he came in this summer, developed a 3-point shot, which has made him very interesting to watch on the offensive side of the floor because he can step out, pump a three, and then drive in and do his little spin move that he does and lay it up, and that's a very good move. But then you can just stick him on the block, and he's just so stocky in there. He is a thick guy, and he's not too tall, but because he's just so big, he can battle in there. And some of that experience from being in the Big Ten for 4 years at Michigan is definitely showing in Bloomington this season. This game against Minnesota, he had 8 points, 4 of 7 from the floor. But didn't you say he came in? He had 4 points right off the bat. He made an instant impact, and I think that's something else that we can see or look forward to for him coming off the bench, just like Anunoby.
Yeah, and we're teasing everyone about that Michigan game. So we're going to get to that in just 1 minute after this quick announcement. If you guys want to support our show, go to assemblycall.com/support or assemblycall.com/gear. We have some awesome gear there, including some limestone coasters, which Josh and I each have. They're very cool. Limestone with the Assembly Call logo on them. Very cheap, great purchase, nice to have. Great party gift, too. And 25% of the proceeds go to the Assembly Call directly to help keep our chat going, all that good stuff that you guys love, and including what's happening right now before our eyes. Getting Jared and the guys to Bloomington, which we will try and make now an annual thing. They're having a ton of fun. They're over at Yogi's right now. Go meet them if you're in town. They'll be shaking hands, talking Hoosier basketball. They are so happy to be back here. Jared, I know, is having a heck of a time. We're going to try and make this a yearly thing. 25% of the proceeds there go to that purpose. Try to get that to happen every year. We'd love to see you guys give us some support at assemblycall.com/support or assemblycall.com/gear. Check it out. Buy a gift. Valentine's Day is coming up. Who knows? Buy that special Hoosier something nice. Now, back to the Michigan game. Looking forward, this is huge because Indiana obviously did not play well today. They lost in Madison. Michigan might get Karis LeVert back. If you want to graph this, Indiana's momentum is going like this, and there goes Michigan's. Completely diverging. Michigan is soaring into outer space right now. Maybe not that extreme, but they are riding the momentum tidal wave, and they could break free. And this game could, like we discussed for that Michigan-Nebraska game, which is seemingly a meaningless game, but we made it interesting because we said the winner of that game could go on a tear. Michigan won that game, and here they come. Here comes Karis LeVert. They're winning games without him. He comes back in that lineup. This is a serious trap game for Indiana in every sense of the word. Now, we're going to do a little previewing action and stuff that we won't do on our midweek show, that we didn't do on our midweek show on Thursday night. What's an X factor in this game? Not necessarily a key, but something to keep your eye on. Maybe an in-game adjustment or a matchup or something along those lines. Something X's and O's. Something we did not talk about last Thursday. What do you have as an X factor for this game on Tuesday night?
I think it has something to do with the bench. I mean, we've been talking about it. I mean, it's been OG Anunoby. It's been Max Bielfeldt. It's been just that entire bench coming in and producing. We didn't see that against Wisconsin the other day on the road. I'd also like to maybe see something out of Juwan Morgan and Nick Zeisloft. Both of them haven't really gotten going, especially Nick Zeisloft. I would really like to see him get it going in this game, hit some shots from the outside. He was 0 for 4 today, but getting that bench in the game early, because we saw that right after the under-16 timeout. We saw Bielfeldt and Morgan in there right away. So maybe the bench can get involved early. That would give Yogi Ferrell a spell, Thomas Bryant a spell on the bench, just to have them fresh for the end of the game. And then when it's crunch time, it's the last 4 minutes of the game, you can send them in. They'll be ready to go, plenty of energy left in the tank, and hopefully they can make something happen at the end of the game. But I think getting the bench involved in this game is going to be key to Indiana's success.
I agree with you to an extent there. I don't think it's necessarily limited to just the bench per se. I think it really lies within the Zeislofts, Bielfelds, Hartmans, and Anunobys of the world. Like I just said, OG's getting in the late teens in minutes in the last couple games. Zeisloft was playing around 20 minutes in the last 5 games. And he's really gone downhill. Ever since that the Big Ten opener against Rutgers, he's only scored double-digit points once, and that was 15 in the win at Minnesota. He had a goose egg against Ohio State. He was 0 of 8 shooting. He hasn't made a field goal in the last 2 games. He's combined 0 of 8, 7 of those 8 from 3, and he's only made 4 free throws. He's made 6 free throws in his last 3 games, and he's combined for 11 points in 3 games. Zeisloft is ice cold, and there's no other way to look at that. Maybe switch it up a little bit. I don't know if he should come off the bench as much, or if he should, if what needs to happen there. That's for Tom Crean to decide. But I urge you, Tom Crean, consider OG Anunoby. And Colin Hartman's not playing too well either, and Max Bielfeldt is. Now, these guys they don't play the same game. Colin Hartman's more like Zeisloft, and Bielfeld's more like OG. So it's kind of tough to substitute them the opposite way. But Bielfeldt has had 3 double-digit point games in the last 5, and he's only played more than 20 minutes in 2 of those. And that was Wisconsin, the overtime game, and Minnesota, where he had 10. He had 16 and 8 against Illinois, 13 against Northwestern. He's hitting threes, and he's making moves in the post. He's playing well. Shuffle him in a little earlier. Use him better. Maybe limit Colin Hartman a little bit until he can get his shot going. He didn't make a 3 today. He hasn't been shooting too well. He hasn't been doing anything else, really. He's struggled. He hasn't been scoring really all season. So, again, I think this may take some shuffling of the starting lineup, which we both said should happen, but probably won't, just knowing Tom Crean. And I think it could be a mistake, because I think if they walk out on the floor against Michigan with this same starting lineup and go with it the same game plan, play Bielfeldt 17, 18 minutes, play OG 19, 16, whatever they want to play him, it could be a mistake, because I think the presence of Hartman and Zeisloft and absence of Bielfeldt and OG, it adds up a little bit, because those two, the latter 2 guys, Bielfeldt and OG, impact the game upon entrance almost every single time. And if you don't agree with me, go watch the tape. It'll take a while, but you'll see that I'm right, because whenever they come in, they impact the game. They make a defensive stop, or they get a bucket, or they get an assist. Something happens that involves them within a minute of them entering the game. Zeisloft and Hartman can't hit a shot now. Change it up a little bit. You've got a couple days to prepare. Luckily, this was a Saturday afternoon game, not Saturday night, so the guys can recover and be ready to go tomorrow. But change it up a little bit. That's what's got to happen, and that may be off the bench, like you said, but also in the starting lineup, which we discussed, we think should happen but probably won't. I think that's what it's going to take, and I'm going to be very, very nervous if the Hoosiers walk into Ann Arbor and have the same starting lineup and don't really play Bielefeld and OG as much as they should and play Hartman and Zeisloft a little more, because I don't think that that's setting them up for success given how Michigan plays and if Karis LeVert comes back. So that's how I feel. I'd like to see little shuffling in the lineup and playing time, because that's the difference.
Yeah, I mean, and this is a long season. I mean, we saw Indiana a couple weeks ago, or just, I mean, during this month of January, I mean, they were playing great basketball, but things eventually just stop working. I mean, and you have to find out how to fix them. And it's a roller coaster of a season. I mean, you'll have highs, you'll have lows. We've seen lows like we did in Maui. We saw highs like we did these past few weeks, starting off the conference 7-0, but then you also are going to go back down. And I think this is a spot where Indiana's got to flip the switch a little bit, find something else that is working. Maybe that's switching up the starting lineup. Maybe it's implementing a different defense, or I don't know what it will be. I don't know what Tom Crean has up his sleeve, but something has got to change. We are at that point in the season where teams have figured Indiana out, and especially with the competition ramping up, you have got to adjust to the changing landscape of your team.
Exactly, and you absolutely nailed that there. I want to kind of branch off of that. Everyone's figured Indiana out. That's kind of true, but it's also not true, because people have figured Indiana out, but they can't really stop them. Like Northwestern, they didn't really figure Indiana out. They didn't really stop them. Minnesota kind of figured Indiana out. They played really, really good defense down low, with the exception to Thomas Bryant, but he just overpowers everyone. They contested jump shots very well, and they fed the ball down low, because as great as Thomas Bryant was offensively, defensively he was a disaster. I mean, at one point, Minnesota, I want to get this shot chart up on Twitter. I saw a ridiculous shot chart that had, I think Minnesota only made 2 field goals in the entire second half, not right below the basket. I think that's the case. I don't remember garbage time, but I think at the 1 minute mark, that was the case. I
mean, they had 48 points in the paint. Sorry to cut you off there. They had 48 points in the paint. So I mean, that's very telling right there.
I almost have nothing to say to that. That should speak for itself. 48 points in the paint, that's remarkable. And Thomas Bryant is not at fault for all of that, because there were a lot of, the guards were kind of lackadaisical in getting back in transition, and that led to 3-on-1s and 2-on-0s, and it was disastrous in the second half, really, to say the least. But it wasn't all transition defense, which has been Indiana's kryptonite the past 2 seasons. I've seen it. I'm sure you've seen it. Everyone's probably seen it. The transition game has gotten the best of Indiana, but they couldn't really play a slowed down offense either. I mean, Minnesota would get the ball, and they'd be a pass away from a bucket every time. They would get it down low, and whoever it was would either be wide open or do a little jab step, spin move, what have you, and it'd be an open look. Whether it be a dunk or a layup, it doesn't matter. It's a gimme 2 almost, 99% chance of making that shot. That can't happen, whether it's Minnesota, Nebraska, or Maryland. Big men in the Big Ten are very capable of scoring, especially when you don't play good defense. Indiana, Thomas Bryant, man up. Get in your guy's grill. Don't let that pass get down low. If you want to take away the shot or take away the skip pass to the perimeter, that's one thing. That may not be completely on you to stop that pass from getting down low, but don't leave the lane wide open. I mean, you see guys like Robert Johnson, who's been playing great defense lately, is completely shifting his body this way and taking off one side of the court so the guy can't dribble, but that leaves a guy wide open posting up on Thomas Bryant. And then when you got a guy posting up on Thomas Bryant and he's going to, put his butt into him and back him down into the hoop, that's going to draw that defender at the free throw line, whether that be Troy Williams or Robert Johnson or Yogi Ferrell, down to help out. And if they don't help out, that's going to be a spin move bucket. If they do help out, that's going to leave a guy open. And when you have a guy open on offense, that's going to create a disaster because there's a guy open on offense. He can knock it down or he can swing pass and read the defense, which Minnesota has been doing. So overall, this team defensively is a mess, an absolute mess. Would you say anything less than that? Because that's a pretty bold statement on my part, which I do like to do. But, I mean, it's a bold statement. They may not be a mess in everyone's eyes, but to me, they're a mess because they're not going anywhere with this. How bad is this defense right now? Is it a disaster? Is it a DEFCON 2? Can we live with this for now? What's going on in your guys? What do you see from this defense?
Well, I mean, we knew coming into the season their Achilles heel was on defense. I mean, it was turnovers and defense, and I think they've cleaned up the turnovers, but the defense still has some things that they definitely can work on. And one of those things that you were mentioning is rim protection. Tom Crean early in the season talked about rim protection as one of the key things to Indiana's game plan, because Thomas Bryant isn't the best big man isn't the best defensive big man. He gets his mark on the offensive side of the floor. So I don't know what they need to do on defense. Maybe switch up their defense, play a little zone, play a little man-to-man. I think we saw some zone today against Minnesota, but rim protection is key. And Thomas Bryant, I mean, that he's a freshman. I didn't expect him to jump into the Big Ten against some of the best big men in the country and play great defense. I mean, that's just not something a freshman is really supposed to do. But what I would like to see is him making strides, and I think we've seen that, but it's not to the level of a top 15 team, a top 10 team, which is what Indiana was projected to be at the beginning of the season. They were, I think, a 15 in the preseason AP poll. So to get to where they were supposed to be, they need to complement their offense with some good defense. And I don't know if we've necessarily seen the best Indiana defense. They've definitely gotten better, because I don't think they could have gotten worse from the beginning of the season. But losing James Bachman Jr. actually might have helped this team. There's been a lot of discussion about that. But I would like to see Indiana's rim protection get a little bit better and be a little bit more stern at the top of the key and letting people drive in the middle, because just that rim protection just is not quite there yet.
Yeah, but this kind of came out of nowhere at the same time. You know, you look at the past couple Big Ten games. The home game against Wisconsin, they let up 58 points. Home game against Ohio State, 60. On the road at Minnesota after a week's rest, 63 points. Illinois, 103-69. Against Northwestern, 57 points allowed. And then at Wisconsin, you allow 80+. And then today, you let Minnesota score 68. Well, what's that all about? I mean, it just kind of came out of nowhere. Like, they were playing great defense, and then all of a sudden it just stopped. I mean, is the Nigel Hayes thing getting to their head? I mean, because they really couldn't defend him. And did they just play softer today? Could that be a possible hangover from that? Because they were getting called for everything. And today they were playing too soft. So those two certainly could coincide with each other. But what else could be happening right now? Because this was really, really a soft effort defensively.
I mean, I do think that Nigel Hayes thing had something to do with this performance. I mean, because they were called for a lot of fouls. I don't remember the exact number, but Wisconsin shot 43 free throws. I mean, 37 free throws. And that's a lot of free throws in a game. And I do think some of that wore off on Indiana in this game. But, I mean, just like we were talking about, that roller coaster of the season, you will have your highs on defense, but then you'll also have lows on defense. And I think we're at one of those lows again, and they're going to have to figure out something else to get that up to a high. I don't know enough about this team like Tom Crean does to say, oh, you need to do exactly this. But they do need to start to evolve on defense, and we're at one of those lows. So now it's time to go back up to one of those highs. How they will do it, I don't know, but hopefully they can figure that out.
Yeah, and this feels like a game that isn't really a loss, but it's a terrible win. And this calls for looking further ahead than just the Michigan game from a fan's perspective and from an analyst's perspective, not necessarily from coaches and players, because you always want to focus on the next game ahead and believe them when they say that. That's a cliche that applies almost every time. But from a fans and analyst perspective, this calls for looking further ahead than that game on Tuesday. And Josh, I'm going to have to ask you to pull up Indiana's schedule for your reference so we can look at this and really kind of talk about what this team's ceiling is, because it could go a bunch of different ways. They could snap out of it next week and go on an absolute tear until Iowa comes to town, or they can lose and panic. Looking at their schedule, and believe it or not, I made this note when we were up by 16. I see 3 to 4 more losses and no more. I think Iowa on the road is a loss. I think Michigan State on the road is a loss, but winnable. That's the one game I think they could win out of the next two. Michigan on the road, I think, is a loss. And I think they lose a wild card in there, whether that be Purdue or Maryland. I think those are the likely two because, let's be honest here, Nebraska should be a win. Purdue at home I would take as a more likely win than Purdue on the road. That should go without saying. Maryland is a matchup nightmare for Indiana. So looking ahead, I see 3 to 4 more losses. If they do that, that would put them at no worse than 23-8 on the year, which is not a bad position to be in. Not great though. Not what anyone expected from this team at the start of the year. 23-8. I don't like the sound of that. I'd rather be more of 26-5. That sounds more like it. This is a 26-5 team. This is not a 23-8 team talent-wise, but they've got to bring it. So I said, do you have the schedule up right now, Josh?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, so I said they lose to Iowa on the road, Michigan State on the road, Michigan on the road, and a wild card, which I'll probably say Purdue on the road. What do you see here? That would put them at 23-8, I believe. What do you see here? And then we'll talk about what this team's ceiling is.
So, I'm looking at the Ken Palm rankings right now. Ken Palm does a great job. So he has us losing at Michigan, at home against Iowa, at Michigan State, and at Iowa. So he has us beating Maryland and Purdue, along with beating Nebraska and Illinois and Penn State in there. But I think he has that about right. I don't think we're going to beat Iowa, either home or away. Maybe if Indiana goes back to their form, like against Ohio State, Illinois, or Northwestern, and they're shooting the heck out of the ball, maybe they can get a close result there, maybe scratch out a win. But going to Iowa, I don't see them getting a win. But 13-5, 14-4 sounds about right for this team. I don't think they're better or worse than that. I think that's exactly where they fit in the landscape of the Big Ten.
Yeah, and I'm going to disagree with you on that Iowa game. I think despite them being currently ranked 3 in the country, which they'll change because they just lost to Maryland on the road, so they won't fall far, but they will fall a little bit. I think that game at home, they win. And what would you say? What was the score that Ken Palm predicts for that one?
Let's see. It is 78-77, 47% chance to win. So he has that's basically a toss-up.
The flip of a coin. And Assembly Hall is going to be absolutely rocking. That's a Thursday night. That environment's going to be insane because Iowa's ranked high. Somehow, what's going on in Iowa, that's a whole separate topic. But that environment is going to be intense. And Iowa is a team that's not really athletic. They have Jared Utoff, and that's it. It's kind of like their football team. They won't blow you away with speed like Indiana can. And they don't have these, ridiculous playmakers that are going to, go all Lob City on you and knock down 30-footers with a hand in their face. They're a very solid team, and they're fundamentally sound. And we learned in the Big Ten Championship and in the Rose Bowl in football that catches up to you, and that's not going to get it done against far superior athletic teams. And that's what Indiana is to Iowa. And I am a firm believer that translates in both football and basketball. Indiana is far superior to Iowa in terms of both talent, speed, and athleticism. And I think that that's going to get up to them. And I think that I believe that's February 9th maybe, whenever that game is, that Thursday night, I think Indiana wins that game because of that, and also because that's in a point in time in the season where right now I think Indiana has hit rock bottom in terms of where, not rock bottom, but pretty much towards the bottom from the opening night until now. Maui was a disaster, but now they're not looking good right now either over the last just 2 games. So they could turn it around at Michigan. But even if they don't, that Iowa game comes at a time where at some point Indiana's going to turn it around. They won't play like this for the rest of the season. Anyone with half a basketball brain knows that. Indiana will turn it around at some point, and I think that game comes at a perfect time. That's just over a week away, that's about 2 weeks away now, and Indiana's going to turn around. I think that they'll probably be playing their best, if not great basketball at that time. They may not return to form like they played against Illinois and Northwestern, but they'll certainly be playing good basketball by the time that game comes around. If not, it's a disaster. Then, it's a whole separate conversation. We should be, in desperation mode, but that's not the case. That won't happen. And I think they'll be playing great ball. I think they win that game. I think they beat Purdue at home. I think they beat Maryland at home. I just think the road games are going to get to them because I don't really think that there's a team good enough to come in here and beat an Indiana team that plays well in Assembly Hall. I just don't think that can happen with the teams on their schedule. Maryland's the most likely, but I don't even think that will happen. Again, it's tough. It's a toss-up.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about on our midweek show, winning it on the road in the Big Ten is so tough. And I mean, I guess that works both ways. I mean, Iowa coming in here, that's going to be a really tough place to play. And if Indiana, I mean, we also said it on this past midweek show. I mean, this is kind of a turning point in the season. Can Indiana keep it going, or will they kind of veer off a little bit and maybe fall off in the middle of the Big Ten? I mean, maybe this is the start of that today. I don't know, because it wasn't that pretty of a win. But at the same time, a win is a win, and you're still at the top of the Big Ten. Now, where they go from here, that's the big question. And winning at home is big because, like I just said, winning on the road in the Big Ten is really tough to do. So, I mean, Indiana hasn't lost a home game since last November, I believe, against Eastern Washington. So, I mean, that's a lot of home wins in a row. And if they can keep that up, they'll be very successful. But going on the road is just where things kind of come up that you just don't know. And, I mean, things come up that you weren't preparing for, like the free throws at Wisconsin, or a close game at Rutgers, or, I mean, there's just so many variables that come into games on the road that aren't there in home games that can change the outcome of the game and change the outcome of the season.
Exactly. And Josh, I've got 3 questions for you, and these are probably the 3 most important questions I'll ask you all show. If you were to describe the mood surrounding the basketball team right now in Bloomington and beyond, actually, let's stick to just Bloomington. If you were to describe the mood surrounding the basketball team in Bloomington right now in just one word, what would that word be?
I would say frightened.
Frightened.
And I say that because you should have beaten Minnesota by at least 15 points. And that's with the walk-ons coming in, Priller on the bench, whatever. This was a game that Tim Priller should have played in. I mean, let's just throw that out there. He should have been in this game. So this season can go. I mean, we're at the crossroads right now. It can go up or it can go way down right now. And with 2 straight road games coming up, you don't have time to really tweak too many things. You just got to hit the ground running and hope things are working. Because going to Michigan is going to be a very tough game. Going to Penn State, that's a bigger trap game than I think Michigan is. Michigan we expect to be a very competitive game, but at Penn State, that game is just kind of it's an 8 o'clock start. It's late. It's Penn State. I mean, they're not a really basketball school, so I think frightened is the mood right now in Bloomington because there's just so many things that can happen right now. It's at the crossroads of the season.
Exactly, and the crossroads of the season is a great phrase to describe where we are right now. And this is where great teams prove themselves and the fake teams are exposed. So Indiana is facing a challenge right now. If they're legit, if they are a true contender and can possibly make a run in March, we will find out in the next 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks maybe. This is not a 1 or 2 game experiment. This is a 3-week experiment. The real teams will be exposed and the fake teams will be exposed. This is where it separates everything. So great analysis right there, but I have 2 more questions for you. This one is more straightforward and easier to answer. Where is Indiana right now in terms of the Big Ten standings?
What do you mean by that question? Like,
where are they? What place are they in?
They're in first place right now.
So you just told me that Indiana is in first place in the Big Ten, but the mood is frightened. People are frightened and frustrated over this team. That doesn't seem to make sense, right? That shouldn't make sense, but it does. But it shouldn't. Those two don't coincide with each other. Frustrated, frightened, first place. And this is a conference that has 2 top 10 teams, a team in Michigan State that was number 1 in the country, Iowa number 3, Maryland number 8, and Indiana's in first. yet people are frightened. So that should say that this team is capable of a whole lot more than just first place in the Big Ten. So now I ask you, Josh, what is this team's ceiling? What is their potential? How high can they reach?
Well, if they played like they did today, hopefully they can get into the NCAA tournament because they won't win very many games if they play like they did today against Minnesota. But if they can even get back to how they played against Wisconsin, which was, although they obviously did lose the game, they didn't really play themselves out of the game. They were in the game for the entire time, and while Yogi Ferrell may have carried them, I mean, so be it. You're not going to go undefeated in a Big Ten season. But I don't know if this team can really maybe scratch the surface of the Sweet 16 when you're looking all the way down the road into March. But, I mean, this is a team that is – I'm honestly not quite sure where their ceiling is right now. It's just at that point where it can go in so many different directions. I mean, I guess a Sweet 16 berth would be a great season, and I'd be totally content with a Sweet 16 berth, although Yogi Ferrell wants to go win a national championship, well, which is great. There are so many more better teams in the country than Indiana. So probably a Sweet 16. Hopefully you can make a run in the Big Ten tournament, maybe into the semifinals, depending on where you're seated and what the matchups are. But I don't know if I see this team going past the Sweet 16 at the highest ceiling of this team.
Well, I disagree with you. I think this team has top 10 potential. You look at the top teams in the country right now. You know, you got Maryland, you got Iowa, Oklahoma, Kansas. Oklahoma's got Buddy Hield, fantastic player, perhaps the best in the country. Maryland's got a four-headed monster on offense. Iowa's got Jared Utoff. But Indiana can beat both Maryland and Iowa, and they play both Maryland and Iowa. But they play Iowa twice. They play Maryland once. If they go 2-1 there, shouldn't that say that they could be top 10 in the country? I mean, they won't be just because they beat them, but they have top 10 potential. I mean, the talent on this team is superior than the talent on, other teams in the top. It's better than Xavier. It's better than Texas A&M. They're just not performing. So now is the time for the guys like Yogi Ferrell to step up and really lead this team. He wants a national championship. That's a very lofty goal, but it's not laughable. And because it's March Madness, given the fact that that's not laughable, makes it possible. And it's all about your seeding. If they can win the games that they have to win, steal a game or two against Iowa or Maryland, they could find themselves at a number 4 or 5 seed come tournament time. And those teams have made it to the Elite Eight. Those teams have made it to the Final Four. Those teams have won national championships. And this team just has to find their ceiling. And that's the reason why I don't think they get that far. So they haven't found their ceiling yet. And, yeah, you could argue that a lot of Cinderella teams don't find their ceiling until they reach it in the tournament, like Florida Gulf Coast and George Mason and all those guys. But those are Florida Gulf Coast and George Masons of the world. This is Indiana. This team should know how good they are, and they don't. And that's what's concerning, and that's what these 2 and 3 weeks ahead of us are going to expose. They're going to expose how good this team is, how much they believe in themselves, and how far they will go, because those two things will dictate how far they will go. So to answer the question straight up in one sentence, this team has a top 10 ceiling.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very fair to say. I mean, coming into the season, they were a top 15 team, and you'd like to see them move up as the season goes on. But at the same time, it's just kind of finding that ceiling. And you were saying they don't have a ceiling, which is kind of worrisome. So when they find that ceiling, that's when you really got to hit the ground running and get going. And stealing a game on the road would be huge for this team, and that would help them in seeding. And, I mean, just banking wins early in the Big Ten schedule was big because it got you in this position to even be competitive moving forward. But now it's just you just got to grind out games now. It's just I don't really care how you win except against Minnesota. I don't care how you win. Just get the games won and put them in your win column and just move on to the next.
Exactly. And speaking of wins, we got to talk Michigan because this game, like I said, right now the rest of the season is on our mind more than just this Michigan game as fans and analysts. But at the same time, this game matters because it's part of the season. I mean, that goes without saying. But also because it could really, really dictate the trajectory of this team. And it's a perfect matchup because it's a Michigan team that is very good, could get its star back, and it's on the road. So right when this Indiana team's true colors are being tested, you got a good team, not a great team, with its star potentially coming back on the road. Fantastic matchup. I picked Michigan to win that game on our weekly roundup show 48 hours ago. I'm not changing how I feel about that because there was nothing I saw today other than Thomas Bryant, which could be the X factor to make me believe that something else was going to happen. So I am staying with Michigan as much as it pains me to say, but I picked Michigan on Thursday, and I'm picking them again today.
Even though Indiana obviously did not play a good game today, I'm going to stick with my pick from Thursday and pick Indiana against Michigan. I know that's a very bold pick right there just because of this game that Indiana just played, but you got to find something to motivate you, and I don't think you really need too much motivation for this game. You're going to Michigan. This is a team year in and year out that's a pretty solid team. You've had big games there in the past. I remember watching a couple years ago on the last day of the season when Indiana won the Big Ten regular season. I mean, you come to play against Michigan, and I think they're going to come out and play a big game against Michigan and get a win.
All right, well, that's the first time we've disagreed all season on any of this, and that's going to break our tie in first place with each other, considering we're the only two people doing this little competition amongst ourselves. But the tie will be broken, and as I said on Thursday, I truly hope that you take the lead because that means a Crimson victory. But it won't come easy, We'll keep an eye on Karis LeVert, and we'll tweet out, if you don't know already, what his status is for that game. But we probably won't find out until Tuesday, maybe even at tip, because Michigan's being very, very secretive in his availability. John Beilein came out and said, like we discussed on Thursday, that they have a date in mind for his return, but they won't announce it, and we'll find out when that day comes. I personally believe it's Tuesday, given what I know. Josh, I know you probably agree with me there. A lot of people think it could be Tuesday, but we will find out, and that's a huge game. We just said why for about 15 minutes. It's going to change the trajectory of the season. It's where this team's identity will be exposed, and it's going to give us perhaps false hope for the rest of the year or sheer utter confidence. And I can't wait to find out what it's going to be. Josh has Indiana. I have Michigan. It will be close. I'd be stunned if it were more than 8 points. But make sure you tune into that. And then Jared and the guys will be back for that one after their Bloomington visit. Hopefully we can make that a yearly thing, and this won't be the last time we get to do this. But, that's, again, forward thinking. So, Josh, do you have any final comments after today's show, even after today's game that we haven't hit yet? I know we touched almost all of it.
Yeah, this we've gone end on this game and even more, but I just want to see this Indiana team get back to their form. They've had 2 games in a row where it hasn't necessarily been there. They've had some guys that have exceeded expectations, like Yogi Ferrell on Tuesday and Thomas Bryant today. Then they kind of it's just we aren't playing team basketball right now, and I think Indiana needs to get back to that. That's what they were doing against Illinois, Ohio State, and Wisconsin and Northwestern that got them huge leads early on. And I think the first minutes of each game are just key, and we've seen that. Minnesota went up 7-0 today, and they kind of and they stayed in the game for most of the game until Indiana blew it out, but then they came all the way back. So it's those first couple minutes, take control of the game, play your type of game, and Indiana will be successful, and hopefully they can carry that into Tuesday.
Yeah, and those first couple minutes will probably dictate what happens for the rest of that game. Josh, this was great fun, and I'm glad we got to talk about a win. And for the sake of analyzing, I'm glad it wasn't a 40-point win because there wouldn't be too much to talk about. And I'm glad that we had a couple storylines to discuss. But let's root for those Hoosiers on Tuesday and hope that they can change things around like that because it needs to happen at this point. This is the point of the season where a change needs to come.
Yeah, we're on that roller coaster. We've been up, we've been down, and I think we're down again right now. So it's time to go back up.
I agree. That's how college basketball works. You're up, you're down, you're up, you're down, and then it's all about timing. So hopefully the Hoosiers can get hot in the next week or two for the tough part of their schedule. Like I said, I love this term with their Notre Dame schedule. We got to get through these guys now, the Minnesotas and Penn States of the world, and then the competition ramps up. So we'll see how this goes. This was a much-needed win. Glad we got it. It was ugly. It was, scary at times. But we got the win. That's what matters. And hopefully this was the wake-up call that they needed, because you could make the excuse after Wisconsin that, oh, we didn't get any foul calls, whatever. This game, the only excuse was we didn't show up. And it'll be great to see how the guys respond to that going forward. So for those of you in Bloomington, this is a great closing message. For those of you in Bloomington, let's go hit Yogi's. Come meet the guys. Come meet Jared and everyone. Josh and I will be there too. Shake hands and let's talk Hoosier basketball for a little bit. Everyone's in town for the first time ever. It'll be great fun. Josh and I will see you next week for the Big Ten Roundup show on either Wednesday or Thursday, yet to be announced, probably 6:30. That time will be made official in the next day or so. And certainly don't forget to tune into the guys back on the air after Tuesday's game at Michigan. Thank you all for listening, Josh. This was great fun. I'm glad we got to do this. And don't forget to get on that email list, everyone. Subscribe to us at assemblycall.com/subscribe. Again, you'll get analysis that you won't find anywhere else on the site. It's specific to over 1,500 subscribers on that email list. And don't forget to go to support us at assemblycall.com/support or assemblycall.com/gear. Thank you again for listening. The guys will be back on Tuesday to recap that Michigan game. Have a great weekend, everyone, and go Hoosiers.